The Move, Look, and Listen podcast with Dr. Doug Stephey is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download by visiting audibletrial.com/inbound. We'll have a link in the episode notes for your convenience. Many of the books mentioned here in the podcast are available in Audible. Sign up for a free 30-day membership trial, and you can download any book you like. Support the Move, Look, and Listen podcast with Dr. Doug Stephey by visiting audibletrial.com/inbound.
If our two eyes are not working together well as a fast, synchronized team, our internal MapQuest continues to be off. It's consistently inconsistent with our ability to judge time and space. Those that don't feel well grounded, those that have some measure of anxiety, oftentimes it starts in the visual system. If you can't move, look, and listen in a fast, accurate, effortless, sustainable, age-appropriate, meaningful way, you're in a world of hurt. There's a whole world in vision and how it affects brain function that no one's ever shared with you. 2020 is perceived as the holy grail of going to the eye doctor. Well, I'm here to change that paradigm. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Move, Look, and Listen podcast. I'm Dr. Doug Stephey, affectionately known as Dr. Doug in most circles. In some circles, I'm not known by names similar to that, probably not as nice of names, but that's okay. We're welcoming back Tania Whiteleather, former classroom teacher turned special education attorney. And today's topic, we're talking about independent educational evaluations, also known as IEEs. Hello, Tania, and welcome back.
Good morning, Dr. Doug.
So thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to come and talk us through this topic, because it is an important one and it is near and dear to my heart, not only for the vision things that I do, but all the other specialty providers who also have value in what they bring to the table in helping plan for these kids' educational and future needs. So yes, the topic today is independent educational evaluations. And Tania, would you mind giving the audience maybe a brief definition of what an independent educational evaluation is? And we're just going to let the conversation play out from this lead-in.
Okay, thank you. Well, many people know that when a student is suspected of having a disability, under federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, a school district must conduct child find by conducting assessments to determine what those disabilities are, and to the extent that they impede the education of the student, be able to make a plan, the IEP for the student. Sometimes parents disagree with the independent educational evaluation, with the school district's evaluation, and ask for an independent educational evaluation, an IEE. And there are a few things that need to be done when requesting an IEE, and a few things that don't need to be done. One is there must be some way for a parent, and this is just practicality, to establish that they request an IEE. And this can be in any area. Remember, disabilities can be in any area. There may be today somebody discovers a brand new syndrome or a medical issue that impedes a child's disability. And just because it's not in a state's list or not on the federal list does not mean it's not impeding. So it's very important. If there has been an assessment by the district and the assessment is not fulsome or appropriately interpreted, which sometimes requires a little bit of expertise to figure out, the parent can request the IEE. Again, it should be done in writing. Many a request to a district has been made, not part of the IEP, so the IEP should record it, but outside of an IEP, and the parent says, gee, I'd really like this done, Ms. Teacher, and Ms. Teacher says, sure, and a year later, nothing's happened and nobody remembers it. So,
except the parent who made the request.
Absolutely. And if nothing else, if that request is made orally to somebody outside of an IEP, then the parent can certainly, what I do, recommend is follow up with a nice email. Thank you for meeting with me. I asked if we could have an IEE in speech and language. Please do this. I'm disagreeing with the district's IEP assessment. So that can work out. The IEE usually sort of sets things off a little bit in districts. Most districts tend to be a little bit defensive about their assessments. Most people should realize that a school psychologist is not a clinical psychologist. School psychologists have very limited ability in terms of identifying disabilities and their impact on a person's life. They do so within a particular school district if they are school psychologists. They may not diagnose from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, which we are using now, and they can't go outside of their district. And their identification, and I'm using that with quotes, is not truly a diagnosis. It is for the purpose of identifying a disability which impedes the child's education. Sadly, and I've met some really nice school psychologists, so this is not for those guys. Sadly, some school psychologists who must follow the publisher's manual when they administer and interpret any evaluation don't seem to have read the manual. We've had that happen. I hear you chuckle. Yep. We've had that happen a number of times, and I will give you a good example. Many times I will have a student who has significant issues with speech and language. They have receptive and expressive language disability. They don't understand what they're hearing appropriately. They cannot respond appropriately. And they are given a cognitive IQ test that is largely language laden, the WISC,
yep.
Wechsler Intelligence Scales for Children. I try to explain to parents who come into my office, if you have a child with a speech and language disability and you measure that child's IQ with a language-laden test, it's somewhat akin to giving a blind child a book to read and saying, he can't read, well, he's got a real problem. It doesn't fairly measure somebody's potential if you are measuring their disability. So that's one significant example, because I get many students in here who have nice average scores in other areas, but because of speech and language, their cognitive ability is low because they weren't given a nonverbal test.
And I want to elaborate on that for just a second, because I think you've said that pretty well. But for the listening audience, I just want to tidy it up a tiny bit. So a measurement like the WISC has a number of different subtests, both on the language side and on the visual processing side. And there may be significant subtest scatter where you might do super duper well in some areas and really poorly in other areas. And the subtest scatter really is the red flag. That's really the underlying root cause. But if the school psychologist does not recognize the subtest scatter nor write about it in their report, and they just average out all the scatter, that's where you get this full-scale IQ that probably is not really reflective of that kid's underlying abilities.
I think that's excellent. I've seen kids with subtest scores, and I call them kids, who have 110, 115 on a subtest, and on a language-related test have a 70. That is a huge red light glaring. There's a problem here. And yet, when I go to an IEP, and this particular student may have math scores that are also 120, 110, very bright kid. But this student has a language issue. And if you look at that average cognitive ability, which now looks like maybe 90, that's not representative of what the student really can do if you factor out the disability. I like that.
And then again, on a similar note, the discussion that we're really having right now really is circling around the cognitive abilities of that student, and which is a very different outcome than more vision-based problems, and not visual processing like visual motor or the visual processing side of the WISC, but rather eye focusing, eye tracking, eye teaming, visual sequential memory, magnocellular vision skills, or motion processing deficits that are described in other episodes. But I do want to make the point to the listening audience that initial entree into having the psychoeducational testing really is kind of limited to this cognitive ability general overview, and there's a lot of other outcomes that play into that as it relates to central auditory processing disorders or some of the vision problems that I've just elaborated on, or motor-based difficulties that might be more the purview of the occupational therapist. So I want the listening audience to know that there's a whole lot more going on. And again, I think I said this in the last episode, and it's why this podcast is titled Move, Look, and Listen. Those abilities to move, look, and listen are really going to affect your outcome of how much you learn, and that's going to be reflected in great part in an IQ score.
Parents, unfortunately, have to help train themselves a little. And there are a lot of resources, including podcasts like this, some online resources, organizations where they can get information, but they have to have some basic understanding of assessments. And often, parents go in the back of their mind, they go, something's not wrong. He was looking at words and reading words before he started kindergarten, and now he's years behind. Something. So parents know, but they don't necessarily have the training to say exactly what they know. But the IEE, when a parent does not agree with a school district's assessment, gives the parent, and this is straight out of a Supreme Court decision, the firepower to match the opposition, meaning the school district. So being able to get educational records and getting IEEs puts the parent on a more level footing with a school district and more able to challenge what may be wrong. Parent does not have to describe how he or she disagrees with the school district assessment. They can if they wish, they don't have to. Think of it this way, the expert providing an IEE, the evaluator, is the one who would actually be best suited to say, they didn't do this, they missed that. Parent can't do that. Parent may just sort of feel that something's wrong. Again, written request for an IEE. And I want to make a note. There are actually cases in which a school district does not have to assess before a parent can ask for an IEE.
We're going to come back to that in just a moment.
Okay, I'll wait. I'll say.
So one of the points I want to get us to right now is, again, typically the introduction into testing to determine if your child has a specific learning disability, which is the main go-to diagnosis I think school psychs are looking for. What is incumbent in this whole process is that parents don't know what they don't know. So if all they get is the psych ed testing and their child, let's say, doesn't qualify for the label of having a specific learning disability, in too many cases, the misperception then is that their kid's just being willfully disobedient or just being lazy. And those poor kids potentially suffer the consequences of being perceived as lazy or just not trying hard enough or being willfully out of control with behavior. And that's why we're doing this podcast today, because I want folks to know you have a lot more rights than you knew. And this is just to broaden your knowledge base of how to disagree, when to disagree, and how to ask for other help. So just to clarify, if you're a parent who has had psychoeducational testing completed, you have the right to ask for independent educational evaluations. And the letter goes something like this. Your written request goes something like this. In reviewing my child's last district-funded assessment, I disagree with the conclusions, and I'm now asking for independent educational evaluations in, and it might be vision, it might be audiology, it might be occupational therapy, it might be in the field of neuropsych, it could be in speech and language. And then if you've done your homework, you not only are putting on record that you're disagreeing with their conclusions, the district's conclusions, but you are then asking for IEE in a specific area. And if you've done your homework, you're also naming your provider of choice. And I think that's a key component in this discussion, and that you do not want to be held to the mercy of the district-provided assessor. Not that they're not good, but if you've done your homework, you know and have familiarity with the person that you want to go through in the areas that I've just mentioned. And I think it's incumbent to have an understanding of whether or not that independent provider is really an arbiter of the truth. That's the phrase that I use oftentimes. I'm like, look, I'm not on the student side. I'm not on the district side. My job is to bring my knowledge to the table, assess what I know, and report on it and how it affects that kid in the classroom. And so I try to be the arbiter of truth. And in many cases, admittedly, that leans towards the student and the family, because I'm assessing in areas that invariably do not get assessed in. And that leads me to the comment that I wanted to put briefly on hold. So a pretty classic example in my experience in this vision piece is that when a parent submits an IE request, names me to be their provider of choice, very frequently a district will, well, either they'll call the parent because I'm not sure they want to put this stuff in writing, or they ultimately put it in writing because the parents know, don't do stuff over the phone, make a written record. And the district will write back to the parent then and say, well, we're going to deny your IE request because you are asking us to assess in an area that we haven't previously assessed in. And that's what I want you to speak to a little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, and I'd like to take 1 second to jump back,
Yep.
because what you said, something that I think is crucial. Specific learning disability seems to be like the tunnel focus of many school psychologists. Students can have orthopedic impairments. Students can be qualified just for an auditory processing disability alone. And as we both know very well, Dr. Doug, a student who has convergence insufficiency has a visual impairment under federal law.
Yep.
So you don't have to have that and some other reading score.
Yep.
Okay. So let me step back now into the other area. If we're talking about assessments, districts have a duty to assess in all areas of suspected disability. If a child comes to school, is not speaking, I could ask all the parents out there, what would you assess in? Gee, maybe hearing and maybe speech language. It would be so obvious.
Yep.
Believe it or not, I think you and I have both seen cases where something that simple has happened. I know I have. And the child is never assessed, even though the warning signs, the red lights are blaring. And sometimes the parents say, you know, I have 2 older children and she's not speaking the way they were at age 7. These are warning signs, and they mean that the student should have been assessed, not because it is identified, but because it's a suspected area of possible disability. Huge. And there is actually case law that says if a district should have assessed and they didn't, the parent can ask for an IEE. So it's a wonderful, there's a case out of the district court in Central District in California that says just that. It's what's called an equitable remedy, a fair remedy, when the school district knows the child is suspected of having a disability in an area and doesn't assess.
Well, and I might add to that and say that the visual system is so pervasive in our lives that if you're a child who's being assessed through the psychoeducational process, the vision kind of problems that I'm talking about should always be suspected because it's just too powerful. Everything that we do involves the visual system. So I always find it interesting when a school says, well, we never suspected a problem. Well, why did you do your assessment to start with? Were they having difficulty with reading, writing, math, speech, language, whatever the issue is, vision's going to play a role in that. So you should 100% of the time suspect a problem in vision. There was a case in New Jersey, I believe in 2012, about this specific issue, that a parent had requested an IEE, and the state of New Jersey said, well, we're denying your request because we didn't assess in that area. And the federal educational agencies got involved and told the Department of Education in New Jersey, you change that language in your law and you change it right now. And if you don't, you're putting your federal education dollars at risk. And then, of course, you can always ask for IEEs in areas that the district has assessed in as well. And Tania, you had mentioned this earlier, that if you're suspicious that maybe that evaluation wasn't comprehensive enough, and you ask for an IEE, let's say in vision or in audiology, and the district doesn't initially respond to your request and say either yes or no, but instead they call you and they say, well, Mrs. Jones, what do you disagree with our previous assessment? Parents do not have to say anything about why they disagree. They just say, I disagree. Are you suggesting to me that I have to give you a reason? So I try to coach parents on how to best counter these issues when they come up. And then when parents have more knowledge, they're more effective at advocating for their own kids and their families.
Absolutely. And it's memorandum to McDonald. It's an Office of Special Education Programs agency letter, which holds a fair amount of weight, that says exactly what you said.
Yep.
And I did want to point out something that I don't think most IEP teams realize, and I didn't until I got in the middle of a case. Assessment is formal. There are things that are called screenings. And under both federal law and our state education code, a screening, which is sort of a very cursory, summary look at an area of suspected disability, is not an evaluation. So if a district does an initial assessment for special education and they run the kid up to the eye chart, cover one eye, cover the other eye. Oh, look, he could look at some letters in a book. Okay, vision is all fine. That is a screening. That is not a full assessment for vision therapy or vision needs. Seeing whether the student can respond when you speak to them. Oh, right, they responded and they gave me an answer. Oh, their auditory processing is fine. That is a screening. There are usually screenings in visual and in auditory that are done as part of a school district's assessment. Very rarely do I see a formal evaluation in either of those fields, just to line up with that. And screening is not supposed to be done, but this is something that has not been attacked here in California yet.
No, you make a good point, because every psychoeducational summary on the very first page, about 2/3 of the way down, there's a line item that says vision, and then next to it, it says 20/20 or past or normal. And then right underneath that, there's a auditory line item that says past or normal or something to that effect. And yes, by no means are those a comprehensive assessment by qualified personnel.
Absolutely.
So let's continue on. The The family writes the IE request. They disagree with the conclusions drawn, and that's a key part I've understood, that the parent has to say that they disagree with a district conclusion. But on the same note, they've named their provider of choice. Now, I want to take the next couple of minutes and clarify for our listening audience, what options does the district have in responding now to this IEE written request?
This is my favorite part. The district, and I got the opportunity to present this at COPA, the National Special Education Group, Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys, to give them a plug. It's duty, if a district receives a request, and again should be written, for an IEE in an area, they must fund that IEE or file a due process to establish that what they assessed in, or their assessment report, is correct. You would not believe how many districts don't do that.
Oh, I would believe it. I've been on the receiving end of it.
Okay. Many times. And I'm convinced it's because they're just so busy. They overlook it. But in California, and I have stats on some other states, anything from 60 to 83 days is too long. The district must either agree to fund that assessment or file for due process. And there is one small case that says filing doesn't just mean you file a due process complaint and then you withdraw it several months later, after the parent, in my one case, has paid an attorney lots of money to fight it and then go, never mind, we're back, we're okay. It means pursue it, but that is only a district court case at this point. The district can have what is called criteria for the assessment. Typically, the criteria for an independent evaluator, and it has to do with geographical. So you can't go more than maybe 100 miles. Every district is different. For certain evaluations, you don't pay more than X amount of dollars. That becomes a big problem, because where a certain well-known speech and language evaluator, well-respected, was being paid about $1,200 to $1,500 by Los Angeles Unified a couple of years ago, they have cut their, quote, criteria, end quote, to about $700. The logic of this escapes everybody. It's LA's attempt to cut costs. Here is a wonderful person who does a great, fair, honest job, who was being paid $1,200 to $1,500 by LA, and now they've turned around and said, oh no, the real cost, which has to be judged by what the charges are in the real world. In other words, what do other speech and language pathologists charge to conduct a full evaluation and come to an IEP? And it's certainly not $700 or $800, closer to $15 or higher.
Well, and I think on a related note, when it comes to the way these fee schedules are being written, it can't even be that you're comparing, let's say in my case, one optometrist to another. What you actually have to do is see what you're getting for the fees that are being charged. So if you go to another optometrist who don't do all the same things that I do, not only can you not compare our fees, but what you certainly can't compare our clinical outcomes. And one of the things that has become increasingly self-evident to me is what I'm going to say is the somewhat, and this is an optometry joke, a myopic view of how these kids should be assessed. And I would suggest a number of my colleagues aren't doing the full assessments that they should be doing. And you can't create an adequate or legally defensible IEP for planning purposes if it's being built on faulty and insufficient data.
I want to add, I think that's a huge point. One of the ways one of our members, our attorneys here in California, fought it down in San Diego. He was told that 600 and something was sufficient for a speech and language assessment. It is not. He was given the district's list, which is what the district is supposed to do. Here are some providers who do speech and language. Parent, you can use these for your IEE. And as you mentioned, Dr. Doug, be very suspicious. Sometimes these are ex-school district employees. Sometimes their husband works for the district. It's something you need to be cautious about. So the attorney said, no, 600 and something is insufficient, and took the district's list and called up all the proposed speech and language individuals on the district's list, and asked specifically, what do you do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Get all the assessments, observations, meetings, whatever they do as part of their assessment. Find out how many hours that took, and then ask for their hourly. And the average in this wonderful case, I think, was about $1,500 because it took them 10 hours and they charged somewhere around $150. So do the math. And the case was wonderful. So that is one way for a parent to do a little sleuthing, contact these people. Often you will find, as we've done with the district's list of IEE providers, one person has retired, another's moved to Montana, another one doesn't work with children, only does adults. Another one won't come to an IEP meeting, all sorts of big problems. So it's very good for the parent to go through and get notes on those people, find out what they do and what their hourly charges.
I want the message to be sent out today that if you're a parent who's listening to this, or a grandparent, or have a family friend, or somebody from church, or wherever you might be that knows a family and kids that are in this situation, I want you to know that truly knowledge is power. And parents have tremendous more power than they've ever been led to believe and ever been thought to believe. And Tania and I are two examples of professionals in this field who understand the law better than the average person on the street. And our job is to empower you to become a better advocate for your kids and how to find what they really need and get to the root cause of what's really happening and address that root cause so that whatever their abilities are, that they have an opportunity to work to their true abilities and not have them be colored or cut off or change in a way that limits their abilities to move, look, and listen. And remember, the purpose of special education, this is almost a verbatim quote out of the special ed laws, the purpose of special education is to provide further educational opportunities, gainful employment, and independent living. It's not about classroom grades. It's not really about reading, writing, and math, although those are the core things that lead to further educational opportunities, gainful employment, and independent living. But that sentence is the purpose of special education, and we will fight every day to help represent you and your kids' rights as best as we can.
If a parent makes a written request, an email, something delivered to the district office that they stamped or signed that they received for an IEE, and 60 to 90 days go by and the district hasn't responded, a really good step is to then file a formal complaint with the Department of Education. They tend to be, while they may not be as good as they should, I believe, on other issues, this is one they get. If the district has not funded or filed in a timely manner, CDE is likely to say, pay for this IEE, the person that the parent has selected. It's a really good thing to do.
Oh, on a related note, is it reasonable that a parent in the same kind of delay scenario can file an employee misconduct complaint against the person who's dragging their feet through the process to fund or file?
You can, but the employee misconduct complaint, you know who checks that or reviews that? The district. And what you'll probably get from the district personnel offices, oh, it was an oversight or something, it's okay. There was no real harm. When we have filed district employee complaints, we get nowhere. So
Right.
It's not a bad thing.
But it doesn't carry the same weight as the CDE complaint, the California Department of Education complaint, or whatever your state Department of Education might be.
Correct.
Well, Tania, thank you once again for an insightful episode, and I hope that the listening audience, that you've learned a tremendous amount, and don't hesitate to continue to ask questions, search the internet for answers. And before we close out the episode, I want to give Tania one last opportunity to make some final comments and tell us about how to get a hold of you and maybe some resources that families could go search out more information on their own.
Certainly. Okay, I have not a website. I'm not as IT as I should be, but I can be emailed at tlwhiteleather, spelled just like it sounds, at gmail.com. I love to help parents and can give you a little information. There are some excellent resources out there. We have a CAPCA web. CAPCA is our California Association of Parents and Advocates. Very, very good, which you can join and get information from. COPA, the Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys, is the national organization to which I and many wonderful people belong. And you can get information about the federal law. You can get information about what is happening, about all sorts of things. And you can ask questions as a member of CAPCA. I recommend it highly. Next year, we're in Baltimore. And one of the other sources I love is Wright's Law, WRIGHTS law.com. And Pete Wright does a wonderful job of identifying issues for parents of children with special ed needs.
Thank you once again.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Move, Look, and Listen podcast with Dr. Doug Stephey. All of the resources mentioned in this podcast and links to learn more about our guest can be found in the episode notes from whichever podcast app you might be listening with. You'll also find a link to Dr. Stephey's website, which is stepheyoptometry.com. That's STEPHEY optometry.com. You can also call the office at 626-332-4510. We'd like to take a quick moment to thank our sponsor, Audible. If you love podcasts, you'll love listening to audiobooks with Audible. Many of the books mentioned here in the podcast can also be found at Audible. Dr. Stephey has a free audiobook waiting for you as a gift just for listening to the Move, Look, and Listen podcast. Simply click the link in the show notes to audibletrial.com/inbound. Sign up for a free 30-day membership trial, and you can download any audiobook you like. And if for any reason and at any time you choose to cancel your membership, you get to keep all of your audiobook downloads. It's risk-free and for free for 30 days. Support the Move, Look, and Listen podcast by visiting audibletrial.com/inbound. We really do appreciate you listening. And until next time, for Dr. Stephey of the Move, Look, and Listen podcast, I'm Tim Edwards with the Inbound Podcasting Network.